Hello, everyone. We're just going to give it maybe 2 more minutes to see if some other folks come in, but we have a lot to go over, so I want to make sure we have time as well. Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and dive in just so we make sure to have time. So welcome, everybody. This is the second NHPRC webinar series with the Atlanta History Center. We're doing 5 of these total, and they are to publicize the collections we are processing for this grant, as well as to provide resources and additional information on some other collections we have at the History Center pertaining to neighborhood and house research. So today we're going to be talking about finding photos of historic properties and neighborhoods. And we're going to be doing that by talking, at least in part, about a collection with funds from NHPRC that we are processing and has been partially digitized as well. The Atlanta Urban Design Commission photos, is it, Kate? Okay, great. If you could go to the next slide. Yeah, so here's just a little bit more detail on what I just said. National Historic Publications and Records Commission gave us funding to process 4 collections. We finished the first one a few months ago. The City of Atlanta Department of Planning records, I believe is what it's called. Sorry if I got a word wrong there. And then, as I said, urban design, we finished the manuscript material and now working on visual. And we're going to be doing these 5 webinars. So please attend all of them if you can. They're all going to be recorded, including this one. And the presentations are available online as well. All the content for the grant is on a landing page, NHPRC, Atlanta History Center, and it'll pop up. And so, yeah, anything you need should be there. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kate Daly and Josh Hogan.
All right, thanks so much, Leah. I appreciate that. So just a couple of introductions. My name is Kate Daly. I am our visual culture archivist at the Atlanta History Center. So I manage all of our visual collections here. The biggest of which I would say is probably our photography collection. So that is one of the type of material that I manage. I am joined today by Josh Hogan, who is the digital preservation archivist and the archivist for Atlanta civic and neighborhood collections at Georgia State University. So just a quick overview. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of the collections that are being funded by the NHPRC grant, as well as another collection that I think supplements this material really well, that's already in our holdings, but is not being funded by that grant. And then I'm going to turn it over to Josh to talk about some of the collections at Georgia State University that are of a visual nature that folks can use for land use research and urban planning. And then we're going to save questions for the end. So I'm going to go first, and then Josh is going to talk for a little while, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions for any of us, feel free to put those in the chat box. If you wouldn't mind, please don't put them in the Q&A just so that everyone can see them. But we'll try to monitor both just in case. All right, so I'm going to start just for the little overview about, kind of the significance of these materials. So really specifically, we're talking about photographic materials. So kind of in a really obvious way, those can serve as visual records of people, places, and events. They're tangible links to the past. And they also can show changes in neighborhoods and structures, as well as, the impact of those changes on residents and displacement of various communities. These photographs can also be used for documenting kind of rehabilitation on historic properties and houses. So, it's kind of useful to see images from the past and kind of connect them to the present and see how things have changed if folks want to, make changes to the property specifically. And they also can serve as supplements to other resources. So, as Leah mentioned, there's an Urban Design Commission records collection. So we have an Urban Design Commission visual collection that can supplement one another. But they also can, provide context when it comes to, doing research in city directories, building permits, and Sanborn fire insurance maps, which were briefly discussed in the last webinar that we had with Erica Haig and Don Rooney. So at the Atlanta History Center, the types of researchers that we most get, and I imagine that it's quite similar for Georgia State. Josh can speak a little bit more to that, but we get a lot of neighborhood and home researchers, people who are doing urban planning research. So that's a lot of homeowners, real estate agents, people who do property surveying and academics. And I would say, the number one question that I get from historic house researchers is there a photograph of my home? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. It's actually quite unusual for there to be historic photographs of specific properties. And if we do have them, they're not overly well described. They're not usually described by specific addresses or streets. So the nice thing about the NHPRC grant is that the collections that we're funding actually do offer that type of information. So that's very unique. So just to kind of get started, the first collection that I'm going to talk about is the Atlanta Urban Design Commission collection at the Atlanta History Center. So as we mentioned previously, the Urban Design Commission records have already been processed, and there is a finding aid that's available online if folks want to see what's contained inside that collection. We're actually working on the Urban Design Commission visual collection at the moment. So that should be processed and finished by the end of this year. There are several slides, though, that are digitized and available online currently. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second as well. So the Urban Design Commission, really, it was established in 1975 to designate properties and districts within the city of Atlanta as historically significant within several different categories: historic buildings or sites, landmark buildings or sites, conservation districts, historic districts, or landmark districts. They also evaluate proposed conservation and development projects proposed by or submitted on behalf or submitted to the city of Atlanta. So that's kind of what the Urban Design Commission does. Our collection specifically, it really spans the time period between 1970 and 1990. And it documents, I would say, maybe not nearly every neighborhood in Atlanta, but certainly many of them, at least more than half of them. So the types of structures that are included in this collection are residential, religious structures, in cemeteries, things like that, commercial buildings, educational facilities, and others. So it's got a wide variety of types of structures or neighborhoods. And the nice thing about this collection is that all of the images in the collection are organized and arranged by neighborhood. So if you're looking for a specific neighborhood, you'll be able to search for that material in that way. Many of them, however, are identified by specific streets or addresses, which is, again, as I mentioned before, is really unique and interesting. All right, and so As I mentioned, not all of the neighborhoods are covered in this collection, but certainly many of them are. And when I talk about coverage specifically in this context for the Atlanta Urban Design visual materials, I'm really referencing the slide collection, which, as I mentioned, there are nearly 4,000 slides that are available online that are digitized that we kind of did separately from this grant project. So this coverage really is in reference to the slide collection, just because that's what we know that the coverage is. And so if you go on our album website, you'll be able to search things by geographic location. You can kind of see on the left here, this is what that would look like. You can search, there are 99 photos of Kirkwood that we know of. For instance, you can search it that way. You can also search by street address as well. So I actually have, this is a little bit outdated. I have down here, there's a July 2024 completion. We actually just finished. So we should be able to put a link to that material in the chat box if folks want to take a closer look at the materials that are online. And then by the end of December, we are going to finish processing the collection. So our project archivist is currently working on that. And there are about 11,000 images in the collection. So this coverage should hopefully expand once we finish that project. So I just wanted to show you guys a few examples of the material that are in this collection. All right, so some of these areas do currently exist and are preserved, and some aren't preserved. So I just wanted to kind of give you guys a variety of both, just to kind of give you a sampling of what's in the collection. So as I mentioned, there are residential sites that are covered. So this is just an example, the neighborhood of Cabbagetown, which is the mill village for the Fulton Bag and Cotton Mills. This is now a City of Atlanta landmark district. And, there is a National Register, form that I've linked to this slide. And as Leah mentioned, we're going to send out the slides to y'all after the fact. So, you guys can take a closer look at some of the links. We're not going to get into, the areas of significance just really for the sake of time, but I did want to include that. I'm also not going to spend a lot of time on the differences between the Atlanta Urban Design Commission and the National Register. That was actually covered in our last webinar. So if you guys want to go take a look at that, Don Rooney from the State Historic Preservation Office definitely talks a lot about that in more detail. And then, so there are also residential areas that no longer exist that are covered. So this slide is dated at 1975. And so this is the residential neighborhood of Plunketttown, which was a lower income Black neighborhood that was essentially raised to make way for the airport. So, this is the only slide that I have that really represents this neighborhood. I know that we have a few others in the collection, but it's, incredible to have, any kind of photographic documentation of neighborhoods that essentially no longer exist. All right, and then we have, here's just an example of some of the commercial structures that we have. This is the Fairlinger building. It was also called the Francis Hotel. And it was actually nominated by the Urban Design Commission for the National Register. Unfortunately, they weren't able to preserve this building. In 1988, there was a fire that caused significant damage. And so, you can actually see it in this photograph at the top. This photograph was taken the same year that the building was demolished. And it's now the site of SunTrust Plaza. All right. And then there are several religious structures. There's both churches and cemeteries. So there's a good variety of material related to religious institutions. This is the Old Friendship Baptist Church, which is the oldest African-American church in Atlanta. I believe this building dated back to the 1870s, and it was raised to make way for the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. There's a new building that is on Walnut Street currently, but this is the old building that no longer exists in that area. And then kind of in, brighter news, there are educational structures and some buildings that are that have been repurposed. So this is the Roosevelt High School. This is kind of in the Grant Park area on Rosalia Street. And so this is now apartment buildings. It was originally the site of Girls High School. And it's it's a really beautiful 1920s building. If you ever get a chance to get in there and see that building, I highly recommend it. It's incredible. All right, and then moving on. So the other collection that is covered as part of the NHPRC grant are the Atlanta real estate appraisals. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these just because we are going to talk about them in a later webinar, but it is half photographic, half manuscript. And so I definitely wanted to mention them in the context of this in this webinar. So there are about 10,000 appraisals that range from 1924 to 1983. And so these appraisals really starting in the 1960s, late 1960s, there is probably a photograph for every single appraisal, which is incredible. And they are all organized by specific addresses. And so earlier appraisals usually do come with a drawing or plat map or something like that. But really in the 1960s is when we see a lot of the photographs that are covered in this collection. And so the purpose of these appraisals is to show land valuation over time. And so they include, things like land lots, residences, businesses. They have financial assessments, you know, descriptions of the property, things like that. So I'm going to kind of breeze through these examples just because we are going to talk about them at a later date, and they aren't strictly all photographic, but you kind of can't talk about the appraisals, you can't talk about the photographs without the appraisal and vice versa. So I think it's important to include them all as a whole. So this is an appraisal from 1965. And so kind of what happens is folks send a letter to the corporate or to the board, the real estate board, requesting an appraisal for a certain property. So this is somebody requesting an appraisal for 3 properties. Here's just kind of the third property. And then usually these will include a photograph. So this is from 1965. So this is an example of one of the appraisals that definitely includes a photograph for every single one. And then what they'll usually include is a plat map kind of showing you exactly where this property was. So I think it's great to have kind of a visual of a plat as well as a photograph showing you exactly what that property looked like and what was there at that time. And then also what they include is a discussion. And so, it's things like the lot size, the economic life of the building, and then they'll also include evaluation. So kind of what they perceive that property being valued at that time. And then this is just kind of a worksheet that they use, to kind of describe, improvements, different calculations for how they, value things. So I think that's really interesting. Let's see, going a little ahead of myself, excuse me. All right. And then this building, so this is one on Mitchell Street. I thought this one was actually really interesting. I just kind of pulled this appraisal very randomly out of the drawers where we had them. So this is a laundromat on Mitchell Street. So as you can see from the plat, this is actually slightly south of where the current Mercedes-Benz Stadium is, I believe. So there's that. Yeah, and there's a description. Again, I'm not going to go into great detail about these. We're going to send the slides out later on. So if you guys wanted to take a closer look about what is included in these, I highly recommend that you take a look. So I wanted to include the appraisal as a whole appraisal versus, sections. The thing that I thought was really interesting about this is, they, in the worksheet, they say, describe the location and future prospects kind of here in the middle, and they describe it as declining. And then they go on to, talk about, estimate the remaining economic life. They say 15 years, and they ask you to explain why. They say this is a minimum situation building in a colored area. And then, they have this, this section where are improvements the highest and best use for the land, possibly so, which I think is kind of a strange way of putting that. But in the comment section, they say this block has lost its retail potential because of residents moving away from the area due to urban renewal. And so I just think this is really interesting. Part of the NHPRC grant is essentially talking about how these collections can show the impact of, Black neighborhoods and lower income neighborhoods, and kind of, different changes of the neighborhoods. So, I think the use of declining and urban renewal is really interesting to see in these. Those are common terms for a racialized grading system. So, I would be curious to kind of dig into this material a little bit further and just kind of see what else is there and what else is discussed in that regard. So I thought that was really interesting. This was just a random appraisal that I pulled out of the the drawers. So and then I'm going to skip this example just really for the sake of time. Again, you guys, I highly recommend that you take a closer look. These are really interesting. And I will say this is something that I didn't mention at the top. This collection isn't going to be strictly a visual collection. It's actually, since it is a combined visual and manuscript collection, that's a little unusual for us at the Atlanta History Center. Usually we separate things, but as I mentioned earlier, you can't talk about the appraisals, without talking about the photographs and vice versa. They really go hand in hand. So this collection will kind of be kept together as a single collection. So Just that. And again, I'm happy to answer any other questions about that. I know I kind of have to fly through these examples pretty quickly. All right, and then finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about another collection that I think supplements these that is not part of the NHPRC grant, which is the Fulton County Board of Commissioners photographs. So they are the primary legislative and policy making body for Fulton County. And so we have a collection of photographs ranging from 1949 to 1962. And there are a little over 700 of these. And the nice thing about this collection is that it is fully digitized and available on album. And I have the link here in the slides, so you guys can take a closer look at those materials later on. So they cover, several neighborhoods. It's a little bit like the Urban Design Commission records, where they are organized largely by neighborhood, and also, organized by residential, commercial, religious structures, things like that. And the thing about this collection is that we don't actually have any solid documentation as to why these photographs were produced, but based on the images in the collection, and I think I have a few examples that will show, possible evidence of this, but based on these examples, we suspect that it has something to do with construction of the highway system and expansion of major thoroughfares. So I kind of mapped out where some of these photographs are, just as a few examples. So this is a shame. This is a beautiful, beautiful residence on Capitol Avenue in what is currently the Capitol Gateway neighborhood of Atlanta. And so as you can see, that it's essentially been raised, by the connector. That's what we suspect, at least. And then there's also the other thing I like about this collection is that it doesn't only show exteriors. That is most of the collection, but it also has some interiors of these structures. So here's a grocery store, essentially in the same area. This is also on Capitol Avenue. This is that. And then the Cruise Street School actually is an interesting case. We do know that it was demolished for the construction of Interstate 20. So I mapped it out kind of there at the end, but and I think this photograph was taken in 1957, which is the same time or it was the year that this was demolished as well. So that's maybe another indicator for why this collection was documenting these different areas. All right, and this is just another example, another neighborhood. The last Cruise Street School, by the way, was in Summerhill. This is Peter Street in Mechanicsville. So as you can see, it is also kind of right in the path of Interstate 20. So I think that's a really good collection to kind of talk about, changes in neighborhoods and areas over time, especially when you're talking about the expansion of the interstate. So I definitely wanted to include that one. I will say it's not the only collection that we have on land use research. So I did want to just kind of include some links to a few other collections that we have that could kind of aid in folks' research. So this isn't an exhaustive list. This is just kind of a few of them that are strictly photographic in nature, but we do have other collections such as the Adair Realty plat maps, other plat maps, the City of Atlanta tax plat maps, things like that. I think could be really useful for folks' land use research. And then also, if there's anything that you guys, if I haven't mentioned in terms of, significance of materials and how you might be able to use these in your research, please include that in the chat. I'd be really curious to see how, what you guys think and how you might be able to use this material in your research. One last slide. And then just to also mention, again, this is a little bit of an outdated slide. Mariah, our project archivist, has been diligently processing all these materials and she moves faster than I can. So we, as part of this grant, we are processing the real estate board appraisals next year, most likely. Mariah just finished the Atlanta Urban Design Commission records, and I believe we included a link to that in the chat. We are currently processing the entirety of the Atlanta Urban Design Commission visual arts materials, some of which have been digitized. And then the Atlanta Department of City Planning records, we have processed, and there's a link to that in the slides for that finding aid. So if you'd like to come and see these materials, you can make an appointment at the Keenan Research Center. We're open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 until 5 by appointment. So feel free to contact us and we will be able to get you set up with an appointment. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and I am going to turn it over to Josh. Let's see. Josh, are you able to share your screen now?
Sorry, y'all. Somehow I ended up back at the beginning. Okay. I'll get us there in a second. So my name is Josh Hogan, as Kate mentioned, and I'm at Georgia State University, and I'm going to focus on some of our collections that are related to this kind of a research area. And first, just to give a general overview, because I think sometimes people are not as familiar with us as a research institution. Our special collections and archives at Georgia State house mainly post-World War II materials about the development and growth of Atlanta in the broad areas of labor, government, women's history, city planning, politics, broadcasting, music, and activism. So we're really kind of a late 20th, second half 20th century and early 21st century focus on a lot of our collections. And I include this slide simply to say, sometimes people have the misconception that GSU is not open to the public. We are. We're not just for students, faculty, and staff of Georgia State University. We are for anyone who wants to come and research in our collections. If you do come to visit us, you will be asked to register. It's no longer a paper thing. We have an online registration form that you can fill out ahead of time, and we do strongly encourage you to do that and to create an appointment and to request your materials ahead of time so that we can be ready for you. You don't have to spend any time waiting for us to pull things from their locations and get them into our reading room. I can answer any questions about that anybody might have later. I don't want to belabor that point, but the main takeaway here is we are open to the public. And our collecting areas, as I mentioned, are in various areas such as Southern labor, our own university archives, which document the university, popular music and culture, women's and gender and sexuality collections, and my area is Atlanta civic and neighborhood history, and that includes the Georgia Government Documentation Project. And then we have quite a wide array of photographic collections and a relatively small rare book collection. So I'm going to focus on some collections today that a lot of them are available to you online. You don't have to even come to us to look at them. They're available through our digital collections page, and really are open to anyone to use. So Planning Atlanta is a digital collection material, and that's all related to city planning and urban development in Atlanta. Its focus is mainly on the 1930s to the 1990s. And you can see here it includes 1949 aerial photographs. It includes photographs of the city and of city planning activities, and it has maps during that time period. The sample here is a 1950s aerial picture of the Atlanta skyline. So the 1949 aerial mosaic consists of 124 aerial photographs taken by the Abrams Aerial Survey Corporation. And the mosaic overlay serves as a detailed record of Atlanta at its most densely populated point in time. So what it shows is the city is really a compact urban place that's around the central business district or downtown. And there's only a little bit of development out on those suburban outlying areas that are just hinting at the suburbanization that we now, I guess, take for granted, whereas the city kind of flips inside out and a lot of the development is on the outskirts rather than in the center. You can also look at all 124 constituent maps. This is just a mosaic that's stitched together of those. And this is just a small section of that aerial mosaic. This is one of the constituent photographs, and you can see the highlighted areas where GSU Library sits now and how different that is. If you look at that very closely, you'll see rows of commercial buildings that no longer exist and are sitting under parking lots and library buildings. To the top of the photograph, you can see Hurt Park, and to the left of that, you'll see the Hurt building, both of which are still there. So photographs in the Planning Atlanta collection illustrate many different kinds of planning activities, also, planning ideas and events. These are depicted and described and discussed in many of the publications and oral histories in the collection. These photographs are included in the collection in part because they allow users of the Planning Atlanta collection to view actual images of the changes over time and of what happened through planning efforts. So you can see very different kinds of views here of Atlanta skyline in 1975 versus 100 years earlier, what the city looked like. And then you can see from 1993, construction of the Olympic Stadium, which caused a lot of changes in that neighborhood. So this map depicts existing land use and zoning for the so-called model neighborhood, which includes places like Grant Park and Mechanicsville, some of the areas that Kate talked about that were sort of really heavily impacted by interstate development. And you can also see from these maps that, what the land use was, whether it was low density, medium, or high density, whether it was open space, whether it was commercial, industrial, educational, and kind of see what the state of Atlanta was in that particular neighborhood in Atlanta was in 1970. Here's another map from the same collection. This is a map of Atlanta's neighborhoods as of 1952. So the neighborhoods are bounded and labeled, and it also includes 17 small neighborhoods or areas with active community associations. And it depicts 24 of low rent public housing areas as well. So we also have MPU maps in the 1970s. Neighborhood planning units were created to give citizens more of an input and control over how, and a better understanding of how their neighborhood and what was going to develop and had been developed. So the 1975 Comprehensive Development Plan wanted to expand access through these maps. Each of these maps shows detailed information about the MPUs. I'm including this one because I lived in MPUW for 6 years before I moved to my current location. I still have fond memories of living in East Atlanta. So that's just my own little personal preference. So additional map resources at GSU include the Atlanta Fulton Public Library Collection, and this is digital only, and the Works Progress Administration of Georgia Atlanta Maps Collection. And I'll talk briefly about those. So the AFPL collection is a digital collection of digitized maps that are actually owned by the Atlanta Fulton Public Library, but we make them available on our website. Currently, the collection contains historical maps dating from the 1850s to the 1980s, depicting Atlanta and its surrounding areas and the changes over time. The maps were created by a variety of entities and for a variety of purposes. So you'll see different kinds of maps. This is just a section of one map from, I can't read it with my poor eyesight, but it's, I think maybe the 20s. Here's one example. This is Atlanta from 1895, and you see the weird number underneath it is the reference number of our collection number. So if you search that number, you'll find that exact map on our site. But this was created by the George F. Cram Company. Again, you can see how Atlanta is very much centered on that central business district, and it's around rail lines and not so much around cars and interstates and automobile traffic as we assume now. And then you have a very different map in the collection from the mid 1990s depicting the growth of skyscrapers and the central business district to spread out over a wider area. And of course, now we have MARTA trains and interstates and all of those kinds of things. The WPA of Georgia Atlanta Maps collection consists of several detailed map series of Atlanta starting from the late 1930s. These include the report of the real property, land use, and low income housing area surveys of metropolitan Atlanta in 1940, a 1936 through 38 Atlanta cadastral survey, and a partially incomplete series of Fulton County land use maps from in the late 1930s. The Atlanta Cadastral Survey was made publicly available through a partnership between the City of Atlanta, Department of Watershed Management, and Georgia State University Library. So we don't own these physical maps, but we do make them available online. So this map, which is just an Atlanta base map of a section of Atlanta in the northwest, just west of where the History Center actually stands, and you can see that the yellow depicts this as a primarily residential area of Atlanta in 1940. This map is another one. This is a map that shows the composition of the race of households in various areas from 1939. So you can get demographic information from this. You can also get zoning information and see what the city was like in the 1930s and 1940s. So we'll shift gears away from City of Atlanta per se to the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority collection. So the MARTA collection documents MARTA, which was formed in 1965. It is the principal rapid transit system in Metro Atlanta. The collection includes a selection of historical maps and publications documenting transit station plans and also documenting the impact of MARTA development on Atlanta communities. The map on this slide is from our collection of the planning documents for MARTA. So these include depictions of what the site looked like at the time. Other maps in the series would show plans for the station and how it would change the streetscape, and shows you elevations and even some of information about how the station would be constructed. Now, a lot of these stations didn't, or some of these stations actually didn't get constructed. So you can see some of the theoretical stations that could have existed had MARTA been built out to its original plan. And we're continually receiving these from MARTA, so the collection is growing. Some of the other MARTA materials, in addition to maps, include all kinds of things like a guide to MARTA from the early 1970s, as well as maps of downtown and where stations and lines and bus lines were located. So it's not just the maps, but also some of the ephemera and other material about MARTA. And we also have collections on labor and personnel in MARTA from the MARTA archives. All right. In addition to that, we do have photographic collections that depict the city and buildings. Those include the AJC photos, Lang Brothers photos, and others. And I'll just quickly go through those so we don't run out of time. The AJC photographic collection is by far our largest. It has over 6 million images from the newspaper's photo morgue. And will be continually receiving AJC photos. The bulk of the images that we already have processed and available are from the 1950s to the 1980s. But the collection also includes images that appeared in the Atlanta Journal, the Atlanta Constitution, and many of the smaller newspapers that they absorbed over the years. And here you can see different images like exterior of the first office building being constructed at Colony Square in 1969. You can see Dahlberg Hall on Georgia State University campus. And that picture in the middle top is actually Decatur Street, where the library now sits. And you can see all those businesses that used to be in the Decatur Street area, which was a prominent African-American neighborhood at that time. Lane Brothers Photographs. It's a smaller collection, but still quite large. It's 258,100 acetate negatives. They're housed in 43,486 envelopes, and the collection documents the years from 1920 to 1976. The bulk of the negatives are from 1939 to 1975. So there you have images of corporate bodies, geographic places, events, portraits, and and then there's just the series of things. So whatever that includes. But you can see again, we have historic photos of downtown Atlanta available there. The Tracy W. O'Neill collection that consists of 31,500 negatives and spans the years 1923 to 1975. But the bulk of the collection is 1950 to 1974. You can see here Forsyth Street, the intersection of Lucky and Forsyth, the Ship Ahoy restaurant on Lucky Street on the left, and then a building on Emory University campus. Tom Coffin photos. These are really great if you are interested in 1960s and 70s activism. Tom Coffin was one of the founding members of the Great Speckled Bird underground newspaper, and he was a lifelong photographer and a GSU faculty member. And there's a lot of pictures of countercultural movement, of protests, also of just Atlanta during the time period of the Great Speckled Bird publication years of 1968 through 1976. And we have more local area photographers: David Lennox, Ernest Welch, Steve Eberhardt. The picture on this slide is of the 2018 March for Life taken by Steve Eberhardt. And his collection in particular focuses a lot on protest movements, on as well as festivals and events in Atlanta that have happened in mostly in the 21st century. So keys to navigating our archives. If you're interested in finding out more, we have our finding aids available at archivespace.library.gsu.edu, and our digital collections are available to use anytime, 24 hours a day. And you can see other things, that research guides that we publish, as well as contacting our reference staff or archivists like myself. And here's some more contact information about us. And this slide is collected mainly so I can tell you to come check out our ongoing series of exhibits that we have in our gallery. Our current one is Fighting for Freedom, which explores the intersections between the Southern labor movement and the civil rights movement, and how a lot of the people in both those movements were involved together. And please, be in touch, and I'm happy to answer any questions about how to use GSU special collections or whatever other collections that we might have that would be relevant to your interests. So thank you.
Thank you, Josh and Kate. So if anyone has any questions, we have about 15 minutes. So please write them down in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you'd rather say, voice it instead of write it. And also Erica put a link to a form. It'll just take a couple minutes. It's just to get us a little bit of an idea of how these webinars are doing, and if you would like any additional information or different information. But it looks like we have a couple questions. So the first one is, do these collections include images from COA DeKalb County?
I guess I can speak to this a little bit first. Generally not. We primarily collect material related to Fulton County. I imagine there is a little bit of overlap between the images in terms of Fulton County versus DeKalb County, but largely for our material, it's going to be Fulton County.
yeah, I think that's probably going to be the focus on most of our collections as well. But I mean, we do collect City of Atlanta, DeKalb County, but I don't know that we make it easy to find that from that kind of perspective.
There is also, I believe it's called the Decatur Historical Society. It's not as big, but they have an archive as well. So they also have some resources.
I believe their formal name is the DeKalb History Center.
I always get it wrong.
They're in Decatur though, so close.
And so the next question is, are any of these photos in the public domain or are they all copyrighted?
I believe for, it kind of depends. So, if it's a government produced image that is in the public domain, so, the Fulton County ones likely are, it's kind of on the researcher to determine copyright and how the images can be used in terms of copyright. But I believe all of the others are going to be within copyright because they're all, I don't think that there are any that are earlier than 1930. I think most of them are in the 1940s. And any images that are in the the real estate board appraisal specifically are going to be post 50s, 60s. So I think that is a private corporation, if I remember correctly, Leah. So those are within copyright, but yeah, I would say most of them are not public domain.
Yeah,
Oh, go ahead,
so,
Josh. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no worries. I will stress, especially with our collections with the Atlanta Journal and Constitution photographs, those do have, they're all under copyright, and there's a little bit more complicated process of getting the rights to use those, although you absolutely have the right to use them for educational purposes, your own personal purposes. So just don't publish them or put them into a documentary without without getting permission from the AJC.
Next question is, how do all the collections handle renamed streets? It's a good
That's
question.
a great question. Yeah. So we try to be as diligent as possible in our descriptions. For process collections, it can be a little bit more difficult because they aren't as well described as the digitized material. But for instance, for the digitized material, we have images of Capitol Avenue, which is now Hank Aaron Drive. So what we try to do is describe them as they are during that time. So but then we also we like to add an addendum to say, this is now, or this was later renamed this street. So, we usually have an image and it's like a view of a residence on Capitol Avenue. And then we'll say, later that was Hank Aaron Drive. And we'll try to also do, include Library of Congress subject headings so that you can search by either Hank Aaron Drive or Capitol Avenue. I think some collections are a little bit better about this than others. So, I would definitely recommend as you search the collections to use both street names. So, if you're trying to search for something that is, currently Hank Aaron Drive, I would recommend also, searching Capitol Avenue. And I would say that that's how you're going to find the most hits for those materials. But we do try to be as diligent as possible to, include both street names as they change.
Josh, did you have anything you wanted to?
I think that's what we try to do as well. I don't know that we have done as much work. Obviously, I think at the History Center, the collections are much more focused on those kinds of research questions. So I don't know that we've done as much work on that, but we do try to, wherever we know that there's been a street name change, to point that out.
Then we have you considered interviewing any of the administrators or persons taking the photos to get more context on the photos?
Yeah, so when we usually speak to donors, is often they're the photographers, often they're not. We do try to get as much information as possible from them to obtain that context. Unfortunately, for a lot of these, we don't have those people available anymore, or we don't know who took the photographs. So it's just kind of, it's a terrible answer. It's like, oh, it depends. But, you know, we do try to get information from the donors or the photographers as they are collected. We have been able to do a little bit of work on certain collections to go back and try to find some of this information, but it can just be really difficult, you know, as time passes, you know, people, you know, it's hard to find people, or it's, you know, hard to find information about these things. Often people don't remember. So, you know, when it comes to like the Fulton County images, for instance, I'm not sure the county would remember, you know, why these photos were taken, for example. You know, they don't have the contacts anymore or anything like that. So, you know, I think we try the best that we can. And I think, you know, that is something that we are trying to do in the future, to get more context on photographs when donations come in. But it's a little bit hard to go back and do that work after the fact. So, Josh, I don't know if you have the same experience as we do with that.
I think so. I think by and large, especially with, say, like Lane Brothers or Tracy O'Neill, AJC has records about, you know, photographers and some of that information. And of course, someone like Steve Eberhardt, who is still actively donating to us, we can get a lot of information from him, but he is also very good about embedding metadata in his photographs before he even sends them to us. So which is like an ideal world. Not everyone can do that, but I think that's pretty much a common experience.
So we have one hand up in the chat from Jennifer Murray. Do you want to speak?
Actually, I asked a couple questions in the chat that you guys
Got
had.
it. I wondered if I missed that.
Can you still hear me?
Oh, yes, Jennifer, go ahead.
Okay, real quick, Josh, you had said that you lived in East Atlanta before.
Yes.
I did notice that you guys had the map. I live in East Atlanta as well, and noticed that you have maps and stuff that with NPUW and all that included East Atlanta. So that's why I asked the question about DeKalb County. So is it possible, because East Atlanta is identified in some of those maps, that perhaps there's more information on East Atlanta than thought, just because it's in City of Atlanta and part of an NPU?
I think so. I mean, I think that anything that's within City of Atlanta limits would possibly be in those Planning Atlanta, and especially the aerial photographs that we have. And I did forget to mention that we have an aerial maps collection from the early 1960s that's just not sort of widely available at the moment, since we're still trying to work on getting it digitized and online. That shows, of course, the city as a whole, and as it's more spread out than the 1949. So there will be some things in there. I just don't know that we have identified it that way to make it easy to find.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to hop on and just say something real fast about that. Is that a lot of the resources, you need to look at the date of when that area was added to City of Atlanta. Atlanta's grown over time, and the annexation of Atlanta sort of impacts what is covered under City of Atlanta records versus what is covered under maybe county records. So looking at the annexation map that GSU has actually digitized is super helpful in looking at what is part of City of Atlanta when. And sometimes it hops in and out. So it's just good to look at that map and be careful and be aware of when records might be relevant and when they might not be.
All right. Any last questions? Any before the presentation goes out, probably by the end of the week. There will also be a little bit of information on our next webinar, which we're planning for the end of August. So actually, I'm going to go back to the slides then, so I can show that to you. What, Kate or Josh, would you mind pulling that up?
Which slide was it?
It's just like
Is
the
there-
last one or two.
Sorry, let me. Why is this not going? Was it, hold on.
Was it the last one or two of my section, Leah? Is that the one you're referring to?
Just the last slide of the presentation, I think is fine.
Oh, I think the one that you were on, Josh. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Sorry, is it up?
It is. Yeah.
Oh, it is. I'm sorry, my view got wonky. So anyway, that's to say that so the resource list is here, feedback form is here. We'll email you by the end of the week, most likely. It'll include the recording, it'll include the presentation. And like I said, a little bit of information, which is going to be on the next webinar is going to be documenting changes to buildings over time. So there is going to be a little bit of overlap with what we talked about today, but it's going to be largely about using resources to show how places have changed, you know, as the title said. So we're going to be talking about what's been processed so far, as well as some other collections. And I'm going to be working with an architectural historian who can speak a little bit more to the buildings, whereas I'll probably speaking a little more generally about the neighborhoods. So we'll talk about the Urban Design Commission manuscript material for that, as well as what we did for the city records. So yeah, that'll be the next one. And then we're gonna, as I said, have 2 more webinars next year. One that's gonna focus more on the appraisals, and one that's gonna kind of pull everything together about how to use these collections to fill in gaps with research. So that's the plan. And yeah, hopefully most of what you'll need then will be on that resource page and emailed to you shortly. And we hope you attend the next webinar as well. It will also be free. I believe it's going to be on the last Saturday in August, which is the 31st. Any final thoughts?
Just thank you all
Nope.
so much for being here this morning.
Thank you. Yeah, well, we'll be in touch with you. And if you have any questions, you have our contact info. So have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.